Welcome. This is Anathea with the Art of Self-Love and Emotional Empowerment. I have an online school where I support and guide women in really getting their needs met in relationship. And I'm so excited today because I have Harville Henrix and Helen LaKelly Hunt. And they wrote the book, Getting the Love You Want, and many others. So before we start the interview, I really just want to give them an official introduction. Helen, Harville, thank you so much for being here with me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's an over-the-top pleasure to have you here. Okay, so Harville Henrix, PhD, and Helen LaKelly Hunt, PhD, are partners in life and work. They believe that how we interact with each other in all contexts, family, workplace, schools, etc., is the key to our emotional, physical, and economic well-being, and to the well-being of our children and society. Together, they are committed to the transformation of relationships and to the evolution of a relational culture. I love that word. They are the co-creators of Imago relationship theory and therapy. They are the authors of 3 New York Times bestsellers, Getting the Love You Want, Keeping the Love You Find, and Giving the Love That Heals. Love those titles. And also Making Marriage Simple and 6 other books. Helen and Harville have been married for over 30 years, have 6 children, and reside in Dallas, Texas. And so you can find out more about them at harvillandhelen.com. Also relationshipsfirst.org.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for being here. And am I pronouncing it correctly? I say Imago, but do you pronounce it differently?
That's correct. Yeah.
I did. Okay.
One thing on that needs to be changed. Instead of over 30 years, I think we'd have to say nearly 40 years now that we had now 37th year. This would be the 38th year. Yeah.
Really, he's better than with numbers than me.
Yeah.
And how do we pronounce your name?
Anathea.
Okay.
Anathea. Yeah.
Okay. The name Thea is the goddess.
You got it. Exactly. Translated, Anathea means the graceful goddess. So. All right. So I want to ask you some questions. The first one is, why do we fall in love?
Well, shall I go with that? We fall in love because when we came into the world, we were experiencing our true nature, which is, we call, our language, joyful aliveness or full aliveness and joy. And we lost it very early in childhood as a result of inadequate caretaking, which is pretty universal, so that nearly everybody lost this. There's a special kinds of relationship that infants have with caretakers that helps them sustain their true nature. And also, if it's not there, they lose touch. They don't lose their nature, but they lose touch with their nature, which is joyful aliveness. So we want it back. When we become children, we sort of get some of it back with it's a relation, it requires a relationship to experience it. It's not a true nature that exists independent of the interaction with another significant human being. So our chumship between 6 and 12 with our best friend, we experience it at some mild intensity, but we know that when your kid between 6 and 12 has a best friend, this best friend is their best friend, and don't mess with them. And then that shifts in adolescence to, in most cases, opposite sex best friends, which is your girlfriend or boyfriend. And we also know that that's not gender specific because it can happen with same gender. But what really shows up again is in adult romance, when you fall in love with your adult intimate partner. You fall in love with this adult intimate partner, and you pick a particular kind of person who is similar to the caretakers with whom you lost your sense of full aliveness. you pick a person in unconsciously in adulthood who is similar to those people, and there's an associative memory in the brain that says, with this person, I will experience my original nature, which is connecting, which is experience of belonging, and that it's a sensation. So when you fall in love, you do. You feel fully alive, you feel joyful, everything is really wonderful, and it lasts for a few minutes, a few days, a few hours, a few weeks, a few months. The average is about 2 years for people who stay together. It's the average range of romantic love is about 2 years. And then it goes away, and apparently goes away for most of us, if not all of us, in what we call the power struggle. And the power struggle is really a negative attempt to get it back, which of course makes it go away more because we go into criticism, judgment, and all kinds of angry or sad stuff, or what we call disconnecting behaviors. But we fall in love because we're looking for not a part of ourselves, but for our true essence. And we find it again with a person similar to the people with whom we lost it, our caretakers, and we lose it again. And that begins then the journey in an intimate partnership to find and keep that. And the couples who don't find it find compensatory things for it. They find nurturing things like addictions to take not having it, or they go into affairs to find it one way or another, or they do something to try to find that, but it's only available in in a significant relationship, not just with your partner, but that's the primary location, because that partner is the person in your life most similar to the caretakers in your life in infancy. So that's what we think, is that people are looking for themselves, looking for their true essence.
Yeah, I love the way you explain that. We come in with our true essence, we lose it, and then we just, when we fall in love, it's our effort to want to regain that. But we basically marry our parents, is what you're saying, or our caretakers.
Yeah, we marry, if you put that in quotations, it's our caretakers, because sometimes it's a parent.
Yeah.
In my case, mine is a combination. My parents died when I was young. So mine is a combination of older sisters and caretaker. It could be an older brother, or it could be an uncle, could be the grandmother who was there. Depends on who was the most engaged in your survival behavior when you were little. They are the ones who did it well and then didn't do it well, or didn't do it well at all. Given that only 20% of people in the Western world are considered to have healthy lives, only about 20% of people get through childhood without losing contact with their core, with their true essence.
So it's the journey back home. The journey back to our essence is through the journey of relationship. Do most of us make it? Are we evolving in this realm? Are we getting any better over time? I mean, you've been in this business for a long time. You've both had a relationship together. Are you seeing that the younger people are getting this concept faster, or is this evolutionary process called going back home or getting back to our essence? Is it getting any better, or is it kind of a slow process?
Well, I think that it's, I can say it's getting better in this sense. Since 1972, the divorce rate has been around 50%. And and depending on what your career is, it can be up to 80%. Like we just discovered the sports world and sports guys and these intense sports have an 80% divorce rate, and first responders and so forth. But so there's been a high divorce rate. So there are various interpretations of what is going on with this divorce thing, because it wasn't going on. Actually, it started in 1955 at the end of the Second World War, when the men came home from war and wanted to retake the chair that they had when they left, but their wives had occupied that chair. So a conflict began then that began to produce divorces that arose to 50% by 1972. So the way to interpret this is that marriage is breaking down, the culture is breaking down, life sucks, and we're in a in a bad place. Helen and I don't look at it that way. We look at it in this sense. It's an evolutionary process. And the marriage that began, the marriage that most of us are in, especially older, those of us who are older, was a marriage that started in the 18th century when the arranged marriages began to be transferred to democratic or romantic marriages. In other words, you could pick your partner after the Revolutionary Wars that broke the monarchy and gave people the right to make choices. And one of the choices they got was you can pick your partner. And prior to that was the parents pick your partner because there was social and economic advantages, and you couldn't go with your heart, you had to go with the economy. And
Wow.
that ended. So the marriage that evolved out of that turned into, because the focus was on me getting somebody that I like who's going to meet my needs, is basically what it became to. That marriage became very self-centered. It was a romantic marriage, but it was about me. Am I married to the right person? Am I going to get what I need here? And the answers to that was, well, you're going to fall in love with somebody with whom you're incompatible, and that's going to shake you up, and you're going to not like that, and so the divorce rate is high. So that's been the marriage that's been around. What Helen and I are into, and why we're doing our work, is that we think that marriage has run its course. That marriage, as the traditional marriage, the romantic marriage, which still had a monarchical quality to it,
Mm.
had self-centeredness to it, that marriage is going away. And we're moving now toward a relational marriage. We're moving toward what Helen and I call a conscious partnership. It's a partnership marriage instead of the marriage is about me. We are about our marriage, that our job is to take care of the marriage as we would take care of our garden or take care of our house. We are collaborative partners in the project of being married, rather than, are you meeting my needs? Am I meeting your needs? Let's compete for need dominance, because that's what's produced the old marriage. So we think the old marriage is dying, and that the divorce rate is an indication of the death of an old form of marriage. And the delay in marriage now to about 29 for men and 27 for women is the kind of caution about going into that old structure, and that this new structure called conscious partnership is emerging. The whole idea of relationality as important is emerging in our culture. It's a small little key. It's not a very big theme, because we're into self-help, self-growth, but we're into it's all about me, and meditation, mindfulness, go inside, live by yourself. You don't need other people, and all that is false, because we are relational, social, interconnected people, and we're discovering we live in a relational, interconnected universe of which we're a part. So the whole idea of isolation, independence, and autonomy was a false idea, but it was a necessary transition idea to create Western civilization. And now the idea is changing. So that's what we think about that. So it's getting better because something new is coming that's not here yet. So it looks like a mess.
I know. Yeah, it looks like. So Helen wanted to say something. What did you want to say, Helen?
Yeah. So in addition to something new coming, but right now it looks like a mess, I'll just add that the mental health field itself is in transition. And once upon a time, there was a man named Sigmund Freud who was a doctor, and people had at times charted the stars in the sky, the topography around them, the oceans, but no one had ever charted the within.
Mm-hmm.
Sigmund Freud, first time, 1900, charted. There are three. If you had to make a map of the inside, here's my map. We all have an ego. Gave it a name. And there's an unconscious, gave a name, that's underneath the ego, and then there's a super ego, and so bam, we have a map. So people sort of looked at him, oh, interesting, and then he began to treat people, and when he began to give people diagnoses like hysteria or depression or schizophrenia, and he'd get named, and there were already a few that existed, but there wasn't a health field yet. But he began to talk about the interior, that you can doctor it. You have to diagnose this and treat it. And so I really am not a scholar in this subject, but I just know that, with a few diagnoses at first, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, do you know what that is? Every decade, all the therapists go around and they add more and more diagnoses, like and mania and manic depression and just OCD. And my favorite is inadequate personality.
Oh my goodness.
So over time, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, 50, and then 150, and then 200, and then there was a DSM-4, 275, and 2 years ago they came out with the Diagnostic Statistical Manual 5. So that now there are 300 ways a person can be fucked up.
Oh my God.
Is really proud of, and then with each diagnosis, there's a treatment and a cure. So when you go to a therapist in the mental health field, you're given a diagnosis and a treatment plan. So we don't see mental health that way, and we think the mental health field is short-sighted and treating the within instead of our context. And especially there was a rise in the 50s, the few people that began to do couples therapy, and to begin to think about others around impacting us and us impacting them. And it was in this field. There's now, I think, really catalyzed a lot by Getting Love You Want. There were a few other people that really began to make the relationship. You don't treat the person, you treat the relationship. And I'm really intrigued with your interest in relationship. I'd love to hear more about that.
No, thank you.
Because we think the mental health field too needs to turn the corner from doctoring the within. The goal of the mental health field used to be to shift when a child is born and they're dependent on their mother. They have to be held in just the right way until they can separate and begin to individuate. And at the end, of the apex of good mental health is being independent, self-reliant, self-sufficient. Yay! That was the goal of mental health. And yet the Harvard study recently, the 70-year study of two populations, both Harvard graduates and another college in Boston. Have you ever heard of the 70-year study of Harvard? It came out of
No.
What brings value to life? What brings joy? Of all the Harvard graduates and then one other college, they studied them both. And at the end, is it your pedigree? Is it the family you were born in? Is it your resume? Is it how much money you make? Is it how many houses you have? Is it your work and progressing up the ladder? And they all said after 70 years and studying this huge population, it's all about relationships.
Yes.
At the end of their lives, what mattered to them was their family, and that's it. So, so mental health really is about our relationships. And so we think that too, we're beginning to turn a corner. And not only, we used to think the brain, a woman talks about the single skull theory of the brain, that your brain resides in your skull. That's what your brain is. And, but have you heard of interpersonal neurobiology?
No, I know we have a brain in our belly, though, that the Chinese believe we have a brain in our belly, and it's gone dormant. We've been disconnected from it. So,
and that's the third brain. Yes. So there are three parts of the brain: the reptilian brain, the middle brain, the cerebral cortex, and the gut instinct.
And the heart.
And
The
yes,
three-
all
the
of
heart.
them.
We now
all
have
the
three
time.
brains.
And but a lot of neuroscientists are beginning to go beyond the single skull theory of the brain. Where does our brain start, and where does another person's brain end when we're in conversation with them? Diane Ackerman is a woman who also talked about moving beyond the sense of the single self to the more plural self. But I'll say one more thing. The neuroscientists have said, there's a whole school of them that go, we don't have individual brains, we have social brains. Our brains are shaped by our experiences and our relationships. So unlike, behavior mod, the brain you're born with is the brain you're going to die with. And, that's it. That's what Freud thought. And the behaviorist, you can put a child in a box. Is it nature or nurture? Anyway, nurture is really winning out as responsible for a lot of who we are. And that's what Harville and I excel in. I'm so thrilled to get to be his partner.
I love it. I love it. Well, you know what I'd love to do is talk to you about this idea of communicating with each other in relationship, because our relationship is changing so much, the evolution of it, and we do need to know ourselves in order to communicate. But I think what we do is we project our own inner wounds, our own childhood wounds, and they get in the way of us communicating with each other. Right. Can I have either of you or both of you talk a little bit about how our wounds affect our ability to see our partner and communicate with our partner?
Yeah, and we might respond, and if you'd like to go first, either way, but with also what to do about it.
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
Let's say the wound is that, it gets in the way in this way, and here's what we can do about it. Because we have so much to share about how to move beyond being sad and disappointed and not getting the love you want. We have a whole lot to say about that.
Awesome. I'd love to hear.
Well, yeah, the caretaker attention to the child, or failure of attention in the child, is the basis behind the terminology called the wound that wounds the baby. And what concretely that means is that the baby experiences anxiety when the caretakers are not present to the baby in the way the baby needs to feel secure and that's going to survive. So, and the brain remembers that this caretaker was not there in the right way. And caretakers are there in one of two ways. They're either intrusive and smothering the baby, or they're neglectful and ignoring the baby, or they are resonant. What is the word? They are present to and resonating with the baby, and that produces a healthy childhood without or with minimal wounding. Caretakers can't be there all the time, but if they're reliable, that doesn't produce a wound. But so the wound occurs in childhood as the anxiety about whether or not I'm going to get my needs met. And it may be to be held, to be looked at, to be talked to in a warm tone of voice. Whatever in adulthood you complain about not getting is what you didn't get in childhood.
Mm.
So that wound it comes with us from childhood into adulthood, looking for the need that was not met in childhood. And so when somebody says something to us that triggers a memory, and we then experience that person as dangerous. And so then we go into our defenses and say, well, you weren't there, you didn't do that, you didn't show up, or you're talking to me in the wrong way, your voice is too loud, you're staring at me or glaring at me or whatever. Whenever you complain about something 3 times, you know you're in your past. You know you're now living in the present, the past with your caretakers. and especially if there's emotion attached to it. Like, I like one example. If you 3 times really complain about your partner being late for dinner, and you're really mad about it, you're into a childhood memory.
Mm.
So,
Very interesting.
and you don't see that this person maybe got caught in traffic. It's not interesting to you that they did their best to finish work on time, and that they have no interest in having a cold dinner. It's just they were late and they didn't keep their promise. And so that person had a caretaker who was not reliable to show up on a regular basis so the child could anticipate something happening and it happening. They would anticipate something happening and the wrong thing would happen. So there's a memory there, a whole catalog of memories. So that reactivity means I'm now in my wounded place. I'm now living in the past. I think it's you, but it's actually me living in a triggered memory. You did the behavior, Helen did the behavior, but she is not the source of my reaction. Because if I weren't in that reaction, I could say, hey, Helen, I've noticed that you got here 30 minutes later than we planned to get here. What happened? Are you okay? Did the car break down, or was there an accident? But that would mean I'm kind of a healthy guy and could say I really care about Helen's welfare. But if I'm not into that, but if I have a memory of unreliability, I'm going to say, where were you? Why didn't you get here? It's the 3rd time you've done that. And all of that is woundology, and the other, and so that's what really, and then of course I'll trigger her wound when I do that, because she would have a wound that would be complementary to that. That is, she could never do anything right. And so every time I tell her she's done something wrong, her wound is, well, you can never do anything right. And therefore now we're into mutual wounding each other.
Mm.
It's your fault, it's not my fault, you should have been on time, and so forth and so forth. So that's how the wounding thing takes. That produces the power struggle, and many couples live in that all their lives.
Yeah.
But 50% of them get out of it with a divorce.
Yes, exactly. And so what would you say for our listeners? How can they free themselves from this? It only takes one person to change the dance, because sometimes you're in a relationship where the other person just won't take responsibility for their part, or they don't see what's going on. And I mean, what do you recommend as far as ways to communicate to really just keep your heart open, do your own work, and assist the other person to see more clearly?
Well, I think that you're right. One person can make a difference. If you change the dance, the other person can't do the next step, but they have to do something. Because they can do 2 things. The problem with one person is the other person may spin out and say, I don't want to be here anymore. Or they may get curious and show up and say, hey, that was a different response. What's going on with you? Let's talk.
Oh, why don't I introduce the answer?
Okay.
And then you do whatever you want. Maybe the last 5 minutes, I'd like to say something.
Sure.
The first thing we would invite a couple to do is, if they're struggling in their relationship, they feel like their partner's a jerk, it's not their partner, and it's not them, that we invite people to think of a relationship as 2 people and the space between them. It's a new definition of relationship. It's not 2 people who have conversations or 2 people who are connecting a lot. We take pains to say a relationship is 2 people and the space between them. Because the space between, what you might go, well, that's empty. There's nothing there. Like, I don't see anything there. Why is that important? And space isn't empty. It has energy fields in it. And for a relationship to be healthy, it's not about me going to a therapist and getting healthy, or a spiritual retreat, or psychotropic medications, or it's not about Harville trying to get healthy and then having a healthy relationship. If 2 people can make the space between safe, the collateral is they become much healthier people. And if this space between is safe, people connect and they can have joy. If there's anxiety in the space between, people disconnect. They don't feel safe. And so connection is ruptured. So this can be brought about by a look in the eye, a tone of the voice, a joke, or the worst one, like I didn't think I was doing anything wrong in our relationship. I didn't understand why Harville didn't want to be with me.
It was my problem.
When I was trying to be so helpful.
Yeah.
I just had I've been on a mission. Well,
and you helped me. Look at me.
But I mean, I maybe starting when we were dating, but definitely, we dated 5 years. I proposed. He agreed to marry me, and then I was really gonna improve him, and I'm very good at that. He did not like that. I didn't realize how much he didn't like that. So that was negative. Like my helpful hints about his socks not matching or whatever. Or your nose hairs, excuse me. Okay.
That's great. I love it. I love it. So if you see socks not matching now, or if you see nose hairs, what do you do now that's different?
I just go, isn't that cute? And if it's important, someone else will give him the feedback. My job is to make the space between safe.
Love that. Yes.
And he might want my advice, or he might not. I could always ask him, are you interested in what I think about your socks? And if he goes, not really, I go, fine. Because I can think about something else. I've learned to think about so many other things instead of trying to improve for Harville. So anyway, we have a whole science of what it takes to keep the between two people, the space between, safe, so they can have the relationship of their dreams. And you can bring up your problems. We teach a couple how to talk about the affair their partner had, how they talk about the fact that their partner has been totally irresponsible with the budget or anything. And you can learn to deal with the alcoholism, the chemical dependency, whatever. And you can deal with those issues, but in a safe way.
Yeah, I love that idea of this, acknowledging the space.
Yeah.
Because, our world is, if you can't see it, it doesn't exist. But the way that we're going to really evolve is by acknowledging that part that you can't see, that does exist. So I love how you've defined that space.
Two people's job is to steward the space between.
Oh, I love that.
It's, and what, if it's unsafe, the definition of something that's negative or feels unsafe, your partner is the one who decides if they go, I'm really uncomfortable with the look in your eye, and I say, well, I'm thinking about my sister, or something, and he goes, but I just want you to know it makes me feel real unsafe behind you and beside you, and that way I get conscious of when I'm with my beloved, I don't want to look critical, and I learn from my partner what it is that they need me to do to feel safe, and vice versa, and two people become committed to that. So let me just say a few things at the end, and you can do everything.
Well, I think the first thing I'd want to say is that the space between was a construct that Helen pulled from Martin Buber three decades ago, and shoved on me. I didn't actually like that. I was trained in psychodynamic psychotherapy, and that was having to do with the autonomy of the self. So you got well inside, then you went and had a relationship. But Buber and Carl Rogers and Harry Stack Sullivan were three of the people who began to confront the Freudian tradition, who focused totally on insight, interpretation, insight, and awareness and consciousness, and said, actually, it's the empathy of the therapist that heals the client, not the insight the client gets from the therapy session. So that began a revolution. And Helen and I, at the time, did not join that revolution. But later on, and because that preceded our work with couples. But later on, as we worked with couples, we realized that the psychotherapy model doesn't work with couples, that you have to have something new. And that's what led to Getting the Love You Want as a new book, in which we put couples face to face with each other. And we facilitate them talking with each other rather than the therapist talking with each of the partners or both of them. So that the relationship that in therapy was built between the client and the therapist, we switched and created that relationship between the partners, that they were to become co-healers of each other, co-therapists of each other. And to do that, we evolved a structure of conversation called dialogue. And the dialogue was not a dialogue. We use it with the client if we say anything out of that. But primarily it was to have a conversation between partners that was safe. And Helen is, she's a co-creator of so many of these concepts, because in 1977, about a year in the first year that we met, we immediately went to war when we met. And we still don't know how we ever got married, because we didn't start off with romantic love. We started off in the power struggle, which meant that was how deeply bonded we are. We just bypassed the first section, which went straight to the power struggle.
But you bypassed the love, the falling in love part, the fun part.
Love part.
Bummer, huh?
It didn't last very long, but it was enough to get us connected. And one day we were having a knockdown, drag out battle, and this is in the first year of our relationship. And we were in Helen's home at that time, had come from somewhere. And Helen said, "Stop, let's one of us talk and the other person listen." And so that somehow that regulated our interaction, and we did stop. But I also, as a therapist, was processing that really regulated our feelings. And I went to my clinic where I was working with couples and really began to do the you talk and you listen, you talk and you listen process. And that was very rude, very crude at the time, but over about probably, that was in 77. It was because we didn't get it done before 88 when the book was done. So it was probably in the about 10 years later, we had evolved the structure, which is to mirror, to validate, and to express empathy. And that became the structure of conversation for therapy. And later on, we would say to couples, you must now take this new way to talk into your daily life. So what people can do is learn how to talk. And Helen mentioned safety. If it isn't safe, it's not ever going to work. That is not a negotiable quality in a relationship.
Yeah.
And if you are negative, it's never going to work, because that triggers anxiety and destroys safety. So you need a structure, and you need structure in the way you talk. Nothing spontaneous. It has to be structured. But it's like a tennis game. Once you learn how to play tennis, you can be spontaneous playing tennis. But if you don't go through the drills, you can never do anything but mechanical tennis or golf or whatever skill you do. So there's a certain skill set in being in relationship with another intimate partner that you have to go through before you can be spontaneous again. So we really teach people and walk people. That's the therapeutic intervention, and it's what we've used in our own relationship. It's called dialogue. Then the second thing is that we help couples understand that you have to go zero negative. You want a great marriage. Everybody comes in and they want a dream marriage, and we say, well, there are three conditions. You can have this, and anybody can have it. And one is you have to learn how to talk better, and because talking is the most dangerous thing people do.
It is, yes.
Is the least frequent thing people do. So you have to talk and learn how to listen without reacting. Now, the reason that works was also something you pointed out long ago, is that when we're when I'm mirroring Helen, I have to go to my prefrontal cortex and my left brain because that's where the words are. And if I go there, I can't go to my right brain and to my lower brain where the feelings are. So if I'm mirroring her, I'm staying out of reactivity. And if she's talking what we say responsibly, we call it speaking responsibly, she has to think about the words she's going to use when she's talking about her frustration with me or whatever else she's talking about. That requires her to go to the prefrontal cortex and to the left brain to get those words. Now, the motions may be just joggling on the side, but at least she talks from a cognitive place about her feelings rather than speaking from a feeling place, which, is overwhelming. So what happens when you do the dialogue process is you integrate the prefrontal cortex with the amygdala, which is the emotional center, and with the lower brain, which is the reactive center. And every time you say, let me see if I got it, did I get it, is there more, which is what you do in the dialogue process, you're integrating your brain. And the more your brain is integrated, the less reactive you'll be. So you have to learn that process, or you'll always live in, I got to be careful around here, or I can't be spontaneous. Then if you do safe zero negativity, you then have something which is predictable. And it's the same thing with dialogue. When we're in dialogue, I know what's coming next, which is she's going to mirror me. But if we're not in a dialogue process, I don't know what's going to come after I say something. And Dan Siegel, who founded interpersonal neurobiology, got really interested in mindfulness. And he said he finally figured out why mindfulness relaxes you. And it says it has nothing to do with what you're focusing on. It has to do with the breathing. Your brain knows that when you breathe in, you've got to breathe out. So it knows what's going to come next.
Yeah.
Then you can focus on any mantra or picture or icon or whatever you want to. It has nothing to do with what the brain is doing. So dialogue has to do with that element of predictability.
So consistency and reliability creates that, and predictability creates that container for safety.
For safety.
Yes.
No, we're in a zero negativity pledge. I know she's not going to come and tell me bad things about myself when I talk. So that's not going to happen. And then the third thing we built into this is what we call the affirmations process. And the affirmations process is that I know that what I'm going to get from Helen instead of criticism is, you're a great guy, or thank you for doing that, or I appreciate you for. There's going to be all kinds of affirmation, including bids for connection, bids for sexuality, bids for fun, bids for all kinds of things. So now I have a working model. I know when I talk this way, when I do it without negativity, and when I include affirmations, I'm going to create a safe space. Now I can be spontaneous. Now I can play. Now I can kid. Now I can, be. And what happens with that happens, I feel fully alive again. And now in the relationship, becoming a safe space between becomes the means of recovering my access to my essential vitality and joy. So I feel alive again because of the quality of the interactions in the space between with Helen. And I can do that with anybody who will go through that process.
Now I have a question with this. What is the difference between zero negativity and denial, or not actually, how do you address an issue that is just not a good issue to have to address?
Yeah, you want to do that?
That's exactly what we're saying, that you've got to be able to talk about anything you need to talk about. And so basically, you ask for an appointment and tell your partner what you want to talk about. And they know that when they tell you when they're available, it means that they will mirror back what you're saying, that you want to have a dialogue with them, and you want to do a send and tell them what you're concerned about, and that they would need to mirror you back. And that you can have a two-way, but you start with your issues. And after you briefly say what the issue is, you make 3 requests on something that they can do to address the issue. So you have to learn to ask for what you want.
Mm-hmm.
It's empowering to get to that point. Shifting from blame, shame, and criticism, and all the things you don't like about your partner, that's not going to make your relationship better. It's really learning to ask for what you want using sender responsibility. Short words, kind tone of voice, kind look in your eye. And if you ask for 3 things that will address the problematic issue, your partner can pick one of them. And they go, well, I think I can do this. And if you can't do it successfully alone, you get an appointment with an Imago therapist or any therapist. And that's what we would recommend.
Yeah.
Can you give a specific and simple example of how that would play out for our listeners, just to give them, just a real life example? It would be great, because this is perfect.
I think Harville already did one. At the beginning, he mentioned that implying when your partner's late again, say it's the anniversary dinner, that instead of them walking in 30 minutes late and you going, you're late, it's our anniversary, da, 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 da. You turn around and you begin to shift to wonder. But anyway, and next time, would you be willing to call me so that I know where you are? Because I was worried about you, instead of just lumping down on, but anyway, you ask, here's the problem. You were late for dinner. And I think you gave the example, would you call me ahead next time?
Call me. No, I didn't do that this time. But I would. I didn't.
Okay.
Not this time. But the point is, with this process, you can talk about anything. And if you don't have this process, you can't talk about anything because you get caught up in your negativity.
Yes.
So even deep issues, childhood wounds or an affair or whatever, zero negativity simply means I don't put Helen down. I don't make her bad. And when I have a problem with her behavior or with her thinking. So I talk about me having a problem with that instead of you are a bad person and you did that and you've always done it and you'll always do it. It's that. And so then Helen mirrors that back. But if I slip a little bit into a little blame, she's still in the mirroring position, is going to mirror me back so that I don't get a chance to explode, because that's not going to help anything. She mirrors me, and that contains I get heard. This is the frustration, I get heard. Basically, what I want is for her to be present. And that's basically the epitome and apogee of the human race is, are you present with me while I'm talking, while I'm here? So she's present during this. So instead of denial, you actually open up everything as a conversational project. It's with one condition: you can't put the other person down.
Yeah.
And we have to, I think, begin to move into our closure.
Sure.
We have an hour. It's the hour interview. And I just wanted to echo the beauty of your name, Anathea.
Oh, thank you.
and the divine. And, where does divine start and where does it end? I mean, you're sort of stepping into it and going, I'm divine in a way. And so I thought I would share with you something I said to Harville in our earliest years when we were talking about, gee whiz, we're attracted to someone that's a lot like our parents, and da-da-da and da-da-da. But we have no idea, it's unconscious and da-da-da. But then what do we call that? And Harville came up with the phrase, the imago. The positive and negative qualities of our caretakers is the imago. And at the time I said, that's so neat. I love that name. Yes, call it imago. But you know what? Underneath the imago is the Imago Dei. And have you ever heard of Imago Dei?
No.
Imago Dei is the word of God.
Oh.
And the early church fathers said that inside of each of us is an imago Dei. That is, it's a God
A
seed.
picture of God.
I love it.
God seed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Our essence, our true,
But
unadulterated essence.
and it doesn't emerge. I mean, to become godlike, it takes practice.
It's
Like-
to master it. Yeah.
Our essence is it is inside of us, but to grow it from a seed to a tree, and to be who we are, we can become godlike. And you know who we can do that with? With our beloved. That they've screwed up, when they've done it again, and they know it upsets us, and if we can practice saying, let me see if I've got it, or may I make an appointment, and say kindly and respectfully to them, we're growing a God seed inside of us. Until it was really Martin Buber who said, when two people begin to shift from seeing each other like objects, which most people do, Harville and I tease at the altar when you're getting married, you and I are one, but most of her thinking, but I'm the one.
Yeah.
Like if people can shift that feeling to, I'm here to serve you. I mean, after all, you're wounded, and my first job on the planet is taking care of your childhood wounds. So and when two people shift from the I, it to the I, thou, according to this Jewish mystic, Martin Buber, the universal energies of love begins to flow through the two people and into the space between. That God takes residence in the space between. And we don't usually go into all this theological stuff, but with a name like yours, we just had to end. That
Thank you.
if you think you're godly, like this is like we sort of teach a couple to become a little god or goddess to each other, and really
Oh, sweet.
make caring for the other the number one, not priority, not yourself. You're here to make your partner healed. And when your partner does that too,
Right, because it's kind of a balancing act, the boundaries, and where it's a fine line to walk, because you could get yourself into codependency, you could get yourself into martyrism. So it's that balancing act between, and really that caring for another, but not losing yourself in the process,
But
and
they're really wonderful, healthy relationship workshops. There's ours, but many other people's. But go to a weekend workshop. Like, take care of your relationship. Relationships don't happen naturally. We really think
you have to, they're like plants. You have to water them. You have to feed them. You have to care for them.
And learn what to do. There is now instruction on how to have a good relationship.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Before we close out, I do want to mention that in 2019, you are going to be doing your 30th year anniversary edition of your book.
Right.
And so do you want to mention anything about that? I'm excited about that, and I want to support you in getting the word out about that.
But thank you. So it will go, the new book will be delivered, I think it's January 28th.
And it's Getting the Love You Want. Yep.
Will be thoroughly revised and updated with a new preface. And also Helen's name will be on the front cover as co-author, because many years ago when we went to press with that, Helen is co-creator of Imago and of this therapy, but she didn't choose to be on the cover. And what we've become aware of, it was one of the gender things in the culture that, women don't, they kind of help support men. And so Helen was helping me with this book, but she was actually a co-creator of it all. So we've been through, in the past 30 years, a kind of transformation that we were caught up in the same thing Helen was working in with women's movement about women's voices, and that she didn't speak up and I didn't support her at that time. And it dawned on us that that was being caught in the trance of the culture. So now we're correcting that by putting Helen's name on the book, where it belonged 30 years ago and where it'll be forever, because that's the truth, is that we're co-creators, co-authors, and now you will be visible to the world. So that's the major thing about it. And that'll be in the preface about how we went through that process of becoming aware that Helen's name belonged on the front cover because she was authentically a co-creator of the book.
But there is a lot of new stuff in there, and buy it. People should buy it for a Christmas gift or a Valentine's gift when it comes out.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And Helen, I'd love to do a separate interview with you sometime, and I'd love to interview both of you again sometime in the future, but, find out more about what you're doing, because we need the voice of the older women and what they've been through.
Well, I really, my greatest joy is really this, but Safe Conversations, we could come back on together, but
Sure, I'd love to have you.
I've done other things on my own, and it's really been my head, and this is really my heart, and it's really all I want to talk about.
And we may swing back and ask you in January to have us on to promote the book when it comes out.
I would love to. I would love to. Definitely.
Or make a date.
Okay, that sounds beautiful. You're doing some great work. It's just been an honor to have you here with me in my sacred Zoom room. And I'm going to share this with my students, and I'm going to share this out in the world. And because I think what you're doing is fabulous, and we need more of this. We need more of the tools, the methodology, so that people can practice, because we're each other's practice partners, and you two have been practice partners with each other. So,
right. We have.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Talk to you in
Thank you,
January.
Anthea.
Okay, sounds good. Bye.